All right, welcome back to Experimental Astrophysics. Usually we plumb the mysteries of the universe and build crazy instruments to look for planets around nearby stars and search for alien life. Today we're going to build a guitar soundboard. So if you watched my previous video, you probably saw that I vacuum bagged this soundboard. It seems to be working pretty well now. So what I did was cleaned up the glue, squeezed out, added in a couple things that were missing, and we're basically ready to go. This is my first guitar, so I don't want it to be perfect. But the problem is now we have to do something called voicing the soundboard. Now the soundboard is reinforced by these braces here. These braces give it a lot of strength, but they also damp out the sound that it makes. You get the sound from the guitar from the vibration of this spruce wooden membrane. The problem is you have strings on top of the guitar, and they put a tremendous amount of force, like 150 pounds or so, that pulls the bridge towards the neck. This can destroy your guitar if it's not built right. So these braces are built to carry that load. So it's a real balancing act between getting the braces strong enough that the guitar doesn't break, but still having good sound come out of it. So what professional luthiers do is they sit this thing up here and they put their head next to it and then they hit it. I think they call that a tap tone. Anyway, their magical ears can discern differences in based on the braces, and they'll use their ears to guide them to shave down these braces into to get the sound they're looking for. But that takes like 10 years of practice. This is my first guitar. I don't have 10 years. So I'm going to approach this like a physicist. So to a physicist, this looks like a membrane and with some reinforcement structures. So this thing is going to essentially have a bunch of modes that are going to vibrate and make this thing work. To find out what those modes are, what I would probably start with if I was doing this seriously is I'd make a finite element model of this. I would basically put all of this into a CAD program, a 3D CAD program, including measurements of the Young's modulus of all these different wood components, which are different on all of their axes, I think. And then try to model it, including getting the boundary condition right. One thing you'll notice when you do this tap tone, this is not how it's going to look in the guitar. In the guitar, it's going to be glued down to the guitar body, which means that we have a different boundary condition, which is what we call it in physics. Here we have a free boundary condition where the edge of this can just oscillate up and down. Once you're in the guitar, you have a fixed boundary condition where the edge will be will have to not move. And so that's going to give different modes. So the sound we get from doing this is not going to be the sound we get from the final guitar. But apparently it's good enough. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm going to record this tap tone. I'm going to take the resulting audio file. I'm going to bring it into Python. And then we will plot it up. And we'll take a Fourier transform. This is the way physicists start with everything. You got a wave function. You got a function which is the sound that's coming out of this, which I expect to be some kind of damped harmonic oscillator. You'll basically have a sine wave that decays as an exponential, I would guess. That will allow us to sort of figure out what the fundamental mode of this is, and then we can start shaving these down and trying to see how that mode changes. This is going to be mostly for exploration since I don't have a good target to aim for. I may try to find some of the tap tones from some people on YouTube who actually know what they're doing, and then Fourier transform those, and then aim to try to match what they get. But we'll see how it turns out. This is a physicist attempts to make a guitar, and we'll just see how it goes. All right, now let's do a little bit of trimming on these braces and see how how the FFT changes. All right, I've now used the file and the chisel to take a little bit of meat out of these. Not a lot, but I don't know how far to go, so we'll see. Now we have to see if this tap tone is different. So we'll record this tone. And see if we can see any difference when we look at it on the computer. All right, so the Fourier transform didn't show too much on the first go, so let's go and go a little farther. All right, I just took a little bit more off, did some sanding. I don't like to sand in here because of all the metalworking machines, so I'm gonna go bring this outside to blow it off. Didn't make much sawdust, just a little smoothing. We'll go give it another test. All right, so now we have recorded the tap tones. What that really is using a microphone to record a voltage. So when you make a sound, a microphone senses that sound pressure and turns the amplitude of that into a voltage, which we then digitize with an analog to digital converter and store something like 44,000 times a second, or in this case, 48,000 times a second. So we basically are sampling a voltage wave 48,000 times a second, and then we record that to disk in a wave file. So the first thing we're going to do is use this Python notebook that I cooked up to first load in the different tap tones. So right here, I'm going to go through my normal NumPy stuff, importing NumPy, importing the wave library, matplotlib for plotting, and this widget, which will let me plot in Jupyter Notebooks. Then I got to load up each of the 4 different sound files. I have a nice custom shop Martin guitar that I tapped. I have the unvoiced soundboard that I made. Then the first time I went through and voiced it is tap 3 here. And then finally, the last step of the voicing. So I've got tap tones for all of them. I load them up here so I can start executing that. Then we come in here and we're getting some of the metadata from the files. So we can execute that, and now you can see the metadata here. We're sampling at 48 kilohertz with an uncompressed wave file. All right, the next step is to extract the data. So in this case, what we're doing is using this NP from buffer to get the data out of the frames, and then we're normalizing it so that the 16-bit integers are going to be turned into floating point with a magnitude of 1. And then finally, I'm going to select out each tap tone. So this required a little going in a little bit into the code, plotting the data, and just selecting out a single tap that looks good. I tried to pick a tap that wasn't saturated, so that it wasn't hitting the rails of the analog to digital converter in the microphone. That will help us avoid some weird effects that saturation can give. So I did that for each of the 4 tap tones. And so I can run that now. And finally, let's plot what these waveforms look like. So this is what the taps look like. So you can see over here, we can make this a little bigger. What we've got is this decaying harmonics. We can actually, let's just look at the Martin guitar first by itself. So what we see is really what we'd expect. There's some kind of sine wave. You can see that with a pretty constant period. and then it's damped so that there's sort of an exponential profile on the lifetime. So you can see that the wave decays away over time. This is pretty much what I expected, sine wave plus exponential, classic damped harmonic oscillator. The time constant, this is in seconds down here. So the time constant looks to me to be, I don't know, a quarter a second or so. It takes a little while for it to damp all the way out. And to the eye, it looks like there's multiple time constants. It looks like it damps quickly right here. And then it sort of has a slower damping with a longer time constant. So at least 2 time constants in the decay for that Martin guitar. All right. So of course that Martin soundboard is hooked up to a guitar. So it's in a different state. It also has tension strings on it, which I was careful to mute when I did this. So not sure how much we can use that as a guide. But let's look at now adding in the unvoiced tap tone. So what we see here is now the tap tone's in orange and the Martin is in blue. You can see a very similar exponential decay. The time constants look, to my eye, fairly similar, although the amplitude of the oscillation is a good bit lower. That may be just how hard I tapped, not sure. Or it might be that the Martin custom shop guitar is a lot better than my homemade soundboard. It's also 20 years old, so the wood has had time to dry out. All right, so then I went through, let's look at now, compare, we'll add in the voiced tap tone. So you can see now that shows up in green. It looks very similar to the orange one. And we can even add the second voiced one in here. And so what we see is that that it's really hard to see any difference to my eye between the tap tones before and after voicing. So now it's time to pull out the big guns. So we're going to do a Fourier transform. So what we're going to do is take this waveform and we're going to run a Fourier transform, which transforms from a time to frequency. So we're basically going to look at the frequency components of this tone, and that's going to tell us what modes are present. All right, so here is the FFT of the Martin guitar. You see that it has a primary resonance frequency here on 52 hertz, and has a couple other prominent features, but notice they're not harmonics. There's really nothing over here about 104 or so. So these are some independent modes of the top of that guitar. Now remember, the Martin is different because it's a finished guitar, not just a naked soundboard. So let's look at that naked soundboard by adding it in here. You can see that when we do that, the primary resonance frequency of the unvoiced soundboard is down here around 36 hertz. So that is, I think we'd expect a lower resonance frequency if the thing is stiffer. So it might just be that it's stiffer. But you notice there are some other secondary modes here, like this one around 65 hertz and this one here around 120 hertz that are common to both of those things. So I think there's some obvious differences, but there's enough similarity here that I think this isn't totally worthless. So now let's add in the voicing. So here I went and I took off some material from the braces, and what I see here is between the orange unvoiced and the first voicing in green is essentially no difference. There's minor differences, but nothing statistically significant, I'd guess. So then I went in and took even more off, and let's look at that. And that's now showing up in red. And so I think here we're starting to see that there are some differences. The resonances are a little bigger. Maybe I hit it harder for that, but the frequencies may have shifted down a little bit for this primary one and maybe up a little bit for this harmonic. So, and to my ear, for what it's worth, it sounds a little more resonant. It sounds a little bit more like there's a deep sound to it, and that doesn't damp quite as quickly. So it seems like it's doing something. But I think that's about all we can learn. So I think I've gone about as thin as I want on these for my first time on the braces. So I think the next step is doing the back and then closing up the box. So keep following the channel, like and subscribe, and we will have more guitar content as well as more content from our experimental astrophysics lab in the near future. Thanks, everybody.